Greetings to you, my subscribers, on this new video. The first thing I want to ask you is, why are you watching this shit? Okay, since you're still here and you're really wondering who this white-haired elf in front of you is, I'll still tell you what's going on here. These six represent a squad of heroes famous for their bizarre antics. And so today they wanted to check into one of the hotels in the city, but suddenly saw an insurmountable obstacle in front of them. A note left on the front door stated that due to recent incidents, this inn no longer accepted visitors of the non-human race or groups larger than 5 members. The 6 heroes stood still for a while and stared at the paper in bewilderment. "Bullshit!" Alice shouted with annoyance, unable to contain her anger. Lowering her gaze, the golden-haired girl mouthed that this town was full of racists. He grinned, and Obi, who was standing next to him, remarked that it was strange to hear such words from the biggest racist in their group. But Alice looked at him with embarrassment and explained to the elf that she hated everyone, even her own kind, equally. Although all the members of the hero squad were visibly nervous about this unpleasant situation, the half-orc Imsh, who clearly looked the most formidable of them all, remained casually calm. However, as expected, it didn't last long. Glancing warily at their angry comrade, the tiefling and water genasi realized that he seemed intent on breaking down the door. But Solar stopped the coming apocalypse by waving his hand and thus banishing all bad thoughts from the orc's mind. Undaunted, the boy explained to his partners that this was no reason to be upset. He was sure that if the squad kept trying to search, they would eventually find a place where they would be gladly welcomed. "No, we're all booked up," said the owner of the next hotel indifferently, when the heroes asked if they could spend the night. The third establishment also refused them, explaining that all the rooms were occupied. And even when the squad visited the last hotel in town, the receptionist sitting at the front desk, awkwardly looking away, replied that there were no vacancies. Immediately after these words, the modest girl kicked the uninvited guests out of the establishment and slammed the door behind them. It took a few more minutes for the squad of heroes to realize that this was even now. Once confident in his brilliant plan, Solar stood next to the orc and continued to stare at the door closing in front of his nose with a forlorn smile. Finally losing patience, Imsh raised his fist to finally smash that hated hotel door. "No smash," Solar said with the same silly smile, tentatively stopping his friend's hand. At the same moment, the guy with the scar on his face noticed something terrifying. Pinching his nose, he tensely whispered that he sensed danger. Turning his head, Solar tried to figure out who was exuding that evil aura. Not far from him stood an irritated Alice and Obi, ready, like their fellow orc, to tear the damn door down. With an eerie glance at the squad leader, the white-haired elf, already holding his sword at the ready, guessed that he and his friend seemed to have been spotted. Figuring out the intentions of these two, Soler immediately blocked their path. No, I won't let you do that," the boy muttered, unable to hide the hopelessness in his gaze. Asking the commander not to jump to conclusions, Alice explained that they had a good plan. Moving closer to the golden-haired girl, Solar incredulously noted that these two were always coming up with good plans that ended up costing the team in the end. With a disdainful look at the guy, Alice cringed that he couldn't judge their plan without even hearing it. Meanwhile, while her partners argued amongst themselves, Fionn wondered what their next move was. After pondering for a bit, the water genasi looked around and saw 2 townspeople standing nearby. When Solar said he wasn't even going to listen to the two's plan, since it was based on violence anyway, Obi tisked irritably and put his sword back in its sheath. Joyfully clapping her hands, Alice asked the commander not to be so tedious and listen to them to the end. Guessing what she was about to say, the guy with the scarred face looked at the girl suspiciously and still allowed her to tell her about their plan. Looking like a true entrepreneur, Alice declared that she was ready to kill that bitch at the front desk for a soft bed right now. Agreeing with his friend, Obi noticed that the commander also looked tired. If he trusted his dear comrades, they would have a room for everyone in a few minutes. Taking his hand away, the elf added that there were no more inns left anyway. They'd already gone all around the city, so they had no choice but to force their way into the sleeping quarters. While Obi was saying this, Fionn came up from behind and gently laid her head on his palm. Glancing sweetly at the white-haired boy, the water genasi told him that a couple of kind people had just told her that there was another inn on the hill. Unable to resist this cuteness, Obi decided to give Fionn's soft face a little squeeze, now that he had the opportunity. Pleased with the information the water genasi had gotten, an elated Solar told his friends that there was still hope for them. Turning away unhappily, Alice pointed out to the commander that her and Obi's plan was faster and didn't involve climbing a hill. Solar ended up banning this maniac from touching the dagger for the next couple days, after which the squad headed straight for the right hill. They had quite a long way to go, but right now they were willing to do anything for the pleasure of sleeping in a soft crib. It was already an hour later that the squad of heroes reached the inn on the hill, their last chance for a little respite. The front door opened, and the bell hanging above it alerted the staff that guests had arrived. The manager sitting behind the counter was surprised that they finally had visitors, and even at such a late hour. After welcoming the guests to their modest evergreen hotel, the pink-haired receptionist asked how she could help them. Approaching the girl, Solar told her that he and his partners were looking for a place to stay. And when he asked if there were any rooms available, the manager confirmed it and specified how many they needed. Then the receptionist heard Alice muttering to herself as she entered that apparently the note had not reached this place. The manager perplexedly asked what note was in question, to which the angry golden-haired thief replied by telling her that every other stupid hotel in town had refused to let them stay the night. Asking the girl behind the counter not to listen to this dopey one, Obi asked his friend if she couldn't keep her mouth shut at all. Such words infuriated Alice even more, causing her to shout that it was actually true. Those bastards definitely had empty seats, but they were just lying to their faces. Aye, that'd be 'cause of what happened last week. The incident, they call it. The pink-haired secretary quickly pointed out, taking a sheet from under the counter. Looking puzzled at the manager, the visitors asked what incident she was referring to. Smiling sincerely, the pink-haired girl asked the guests not to worry about it, as she didn't give a damn about the rumors anyway. Visitors are visitors, and absolutely don't care who they are as long as they have some gold in their possession. Fortunately, the squad leader reassured the secretary, saying that they had plenty of gold with them. Seeing the two huge bags in Solar's hands, the pink-haired manager glowed with happiness, realizing that she was going to make some good money today. Taking pen in hand, the receptionist asked the guests exactly how many rooms they needed. Solar in turn asked the girl to assign them 6 rooms. But as they approached the counter, Obi and Alice shut their stupid commander up and asked the manager to book 4 single rooms and 1 double room. Demanding his hands away from his face, the scarred guy reminded his partners that actually the squad was leaving early tomorrow morning. And when Obi asked the commander not to worry, promising that he and Alice would be ready on time, Solar yelled that he wasn't worried about them. The two of them needed to learn to be quieter when they were having fun in bed, and for the 4th night in a row, he couldn't get a good night's rest because of their noise. Laughing, the happy secretary noted that her new visitors were not boring. The girl continued counting coins and offered the hero something to eat. Hearing the food talk, Imsh ran up to the counter at the same second and slapped his palm on the table. Glowing with joy, the orc turned his head and looked hopefully at the commander. Without saying anything, he began to nod vigorously, letting his companions know how hungry he was. Approaching the entrance to the dining room, the manager realized that this reaction could be regarded as consent. Raising the curtain, the girl asked the guests to follow her. Soon, a whole table with all sorts of food and drink was set up for the squad of heroes. The tiefling and the orc immediately began happily eating whatever they could get their hands on. Meanwhile, Fionn, sitting across from the commander, was leisurely nibbling on a bun. Alicia and Obi fed each other with chopsticks like a couple in love. Solar, on the other hand, just sat with a mug of ale in his hand and watched his friends with a smile. Noticing how greedy the visitors were for the food, the secretary remarked that it seemed to her as if only the big orc was hungry. Then, looking at the heroes with interest, the pink-haired girl said she was curious about something. "How did you folks ended up together?" the secretary inquired, drawing the attention of the whole squad. Hearing such a question, the heroes sitting at the table looked among themselves. "Well, since you asked, let me tell you how it all started. I bet you'll be very surprised. It's Winter Festival Day. The city is decorated with lanterns, food and entertainment tents are everywhere, and people are bustling in the streets. It has been exactly 1 year since the great catastrophe that struck the world. Fortunately, so far the festival is quiet, and there is nothing to portend trouble. It seems like it can only mean one thing. Today is the perfect day to take a break and spend time on yourself." A short, golden-haired girl in a red jacket is walking through the streets of the city. Passing by one of the market stalls, she took a fancy to the delicious caramelized apples. Of course, this girl could not resist the temptation. However, instead of paying the merchant fairly for his goods, she cleverly stole one of the apples. Stepping farther away from the market stall, the thief took out the coveted treat and began to savor it. It might have seemed as if no one had ever noticed this girl's little crime. But as it turned out, This situation couldn't get past the keen eye of the tiefling standing nearby. Be that as it may, this thief was extremely lucky that the only witness wasn't bothered at all by other people's problems. Everything seems so calm and serene at the moment. Everyone who came to the winter festival is having fun in their own way, and so there is no point in preventing someone from doing what pleases their soul. After all, even the formidable-looking orc is not shy about playing in the children's amusement tent, trying to catch rubber duckies with a small spoon. Unfortunately, due to his incredible strength, the orc couldn't do it carefully, and accidentally knocked over the entire tent. It didn't matter anyway, as he and the kids standing around were clearly having fun. The winter festival was going its way. At the same time, all the people in the city were being watched over by their god. But who is this omnipotent being who created this world and rules it from the shadows? No man in his right mind would believe it if he knew under whose supervision he was actually living day to day. Yes, you read that right. The god of this world is a little goat in a cute little wizard's robe. Meet him, it's him, their dear god. Except, to tell you the truth, it's not as simple as it may seem at first glance. A breeze blew, pulling back the short curtains of the night lamp. On the table are character cards and cubes for a board game. Taking her seat, the girl began to play with the pencil, twirling it with her fingers. There are already character figures on the playfield, an elf, an orc, and that caramel apple thief. Smiling contentedly, the guy with glasses and a mage's robe asked the players to say something to him. So what do they want to do next? Welcome to the first game meeting at Dungeons & Dragons. In front of the players, there is already a map with chips placed on it. The first thing that attracted the golden-haired thief was the strange dude standing next to her. What if he's bad? The host asked the girl not to worry about it, explaining that it was a normal NPC. That cat girl in the headphones is named Izzy, and she plays as Alice, a golden-haired thief from the human race. Looking indifferently at the host, Izzy asked if she could steal anything from this NPC. Of course, the god did not deny the girl's request. She can try to do this, but before stealing from this poor guy, the player will have to pass a dexterity test. Taking a special dice with 20 faces, Izzy tossed it onto the table. Meanwhile, Alice had already approached the unsuspecting NPC and, whistling casually, snatched his wallet from his pocket. The number 18 came up on the die, meaning that the theft was successful. Thanks to her luck and pumped-up thieving skills, Alice easily got her first 10 silversmiths. After announcing the next move, the host turned to Tim and asked him what he would like to do. Tim, acting as half-orc Imsh, said he'd like to play a game where you have to catch ducklings with a little spoon with your big manly hands. Then the girl, also sitting at the table, added that while the orc was at it, the pretty elf would be watching him from the roof. Without taking his eyes off the huge orc having fun with rubber duckies, an elf lying on the roof of one of the houses remarks that the bulky man looks like an idiot. And even though the orc does look pretty stupid in this situation, personally, Obi still thinks he's cute. Theo plays as this white-haired elf in today's D&D session, and now it's time to take the first minute to describe the characters in detail. Alice of the human race. Class, thief, alignment, chaotic neutral. This girl is free to speak the language of sarcasm, has the biggest brain, and can stab you in case of anything. Half-orc Imsh of the barbarian class. Alignment is chaotic neutral, rash, brash, and as bullet harsh, especially when eating. Obi elf, assassin. Alignment, chaotic neutral. Edgelord demonstratively denies societal norms and supports condemned concepts, an expert on poisons, and is also very fond of snowy weather. Placing the script book in front of him, the god announced that the handsome elf was watching the half-orc idiot. Then, shifting his gaze to Jesus, the guy with the glasses asked what he was doing at this time. Pointing a finger at himself, Jesus, who plays as Solar, revealed that his character is just walking around and dreaming of sunny weather. He really loves the sun. Saying that he understood, the god inquired what no one was doing right now. After saying this, the guy in the mage's robe once again looked thoughtfully at the script. It had only now reached him how much that name was confusing. Laughing, the red-haired girl with the long braid explained that that was exactly why she had chosen that name. Jade named her character No One specifically to confuse and taunt the presenter. First of all, fuck you! Gareth spoke confidently, acting as a god. Secondly, the guy also asked Jade to say what her character was up to. Deciding that this poor guy had had enough bullying, Jade revealed that her character was just meditating. Okay, no one is trying to relax and meditate, but all of a sudden someone comes up behind her and accidentally pushes her. Unable to keep his balance, the stranger falls to his knees. Then he gets up abruptly and runs away. Noticing the frightened face of the fleeing man, no one immediately guessed that something had happened. Yeah, there's definitely something wrong here. I don't think anyone would turn down the first minute of detailed character descriptions. Solar is a half-elf of the paladin class. Alignment, law-abiding good. Good boy, praise to the sun god, actually law-abiding stupid. Tiefling named No One, a nun with a chaotic good alignment. Shy but strong, likes to read books, can lift you in a bench press. The characters, not yet acquainted with each other, notice that there is an atmosphere of panic coming from the south. All the people suddenly start leaving somewhere, and eventually they begin not just to leave, but to run away in a panic and scream. Such strange behavior of citizens greatly alarmed the heroes. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, and then suddenly something like this happens. And while they were trying to figure out what had even happened, an unknown force cut the purse in Alice's hands. Moreover, this force also damaged the scarf wrapped around the golden-haired girl's neck. The cut piece of cloth fell in front of the thief's feet, next to the scattered coins. Such brazen behavior infuriated Alice. With a cold glance at her opponent, the girl asked how he dared to scatter her money. However, the enemy was not in the least frightened by the ghastly appearance of the thief. Opening its mouth, the unknown creature licked its lips, anticipating how soon it would be able to satiate itself with this miserable little human. Monsters have invaded the city in the midst of the winter festival, and so now players need to determine their initiative. The pretty elf was given the first turn, so Theo said she would attack. Turning the girl's attention to the playing field, the host asked her to place her token next to the enemy she wanted to attack. Taking the chip, Theo, with a shout of Kia, placed it directly on her opponent's head. Except that Gareth actually said to put the chip next to the enemy, not on him. Of course, that statement threw Theo into a stupor. After a bit of thought, the girl clarified that in that case, she would just jump on her opponent. And since such actions were not in the rules of the game, Gareth tried to explain to her that it didn't work that way. But realizing there was no point in saying anything to her, the guy hopelessly fixed his glasses. Folding his arms, the host accepted Theo's stupidity and allowed her to roll the dice on the attack. Taking the dice in her hand, the girl repeated her action, saying that she was jumping on the enemy. After saying that, she threw the die on the table. At the same time, her character jumped off the roof of the house, gripping the hilt of her sword tightly. Obi leaps onto the undead horse and plunges his rapier into its neck. The number 20 comes up on the dice. The white-haired elf easily cuts off the head of his opponent. And what Alice and the monster standing in front of her saw next shocked them. Somehow, while doing this, Obi looked very handsome. It was undoubtedly a very unpleasant sight, but even so, he looks incredibly handsome. Holding two short daggers in her hands, Alice stared blankly at the enchanted elf. As you could guess, it was love at first sight. Okay, the other horse had seen its fellow die right in front of its eyes. Enraged, the undead horse decided to get revenge, and now it's going to attack Obi. But it fails its attack, falling on the spot like an idiot. The thing is, got a 1 on the die. The children, trembling with fear, with whom the huge orc had been catching rubber duckies not long ago, did not escape in time. Fortunately, they had someone who could protect them. Gesturing for the children to sit still, Imsh pounced on the nearest enemy and prescribed a powerful punch to his face. The undead horse flew back to the tiefling, already preparing to deliver the next blow. Swinging round, No One slammed her fist into the monster's jaw with all her might. Gotta hand it to her. This girl looked hot at the moment of her outburst. However, we were not given time to enjoy it, as the undead horse immediately launched a counterattack. Seeing this, Solaire cried out that he wanted to help her. And when the god asked the guy if he was sure of his decision, Jesus, who plays for Solar, confirmed it by saying he was coming to help. Then, with an embarrassed look at the player, Gareth asked if he knew what would happen if you stepped away from an enemy who was standing right next to you. That's right, the enemy immediately uses the attack if possible. Everything happened just as the announcer said it would. The undead horse ran up to Solar from the back and bit his head like a cabbage sprout. At first, it might have seemed that nothing serious was going to happen. So did the other characters who saw the situation. Their assumptions were not justified. The monster clenched its jaw tightly and sank its fangs into Solar's face. As soon as the undead horse closed its bloody mouth, the scarred guy fell to his knees. That's how Solaire passed out without even engaging in combat. Seeing the way their comrade had screwed up, the other players watching on the playing field screamed in fear. Realizing that this guy wouldn't last long, the orc called for a healer in a panic. The only problem is that the stupid guy lying in a pool of his own blood is the damn healer. Now all the other players have to do is enjoy the dead paladin's noises. Meanwhile, Alice had already managed to deal with the last opponent. After slitting the monster's throat, the golden-haired girl sighed and wiped the blood from her face with her hand. Well, that was easy, the thief muttered with a smile, looking at the paladin lying on the ground with the others. The wounded Solar, in turn, trembling, leaned on his hands. Turning back to the girl, the dumbfounded boy laughed awkwardly. agreeing that it was indeed simple. At the same time, the citizens of the town crowded around the great heroes, and a man with a red headband approached them and asked to be allowed to buy the saviors a good drink. All that evening, the sounds of merriment and clinking glasses in the local tavern were unabated. In honor of saving the people of this town, the innkeeper decided to treat the heroes to a beer on the house. With a clatter, the tavern owner placed the mugs of hoppy brew on the counter and praised the boys, saying they had done a good job. Then a man with a luxurious beard asked if they even knew each other. Sipping their ale, each of the heroes replied, as one, that this was the first time they had ever seen each other in person. Glancing at the orc with a charming smile, the elf suggested everyone introduce themselves, since that was the topic at hand. After all, they had one together. Noting that this half-orc hugging the tiefling looked like a lunatic, Obi asked him to tell him about himself. And while an uncomprehending no one said she had no idea who this dude was, Imsh happily told his new comrades his name. After saying that, he immediately hugged the elf as well. "I like cute things," laughing, Imsh explained. Hearing such a statement, Izzy looked at Tim suspiciously. Chewing on a spice stick, Catgirl said she was already questioning his definition of the word cute. This orc is actually hugging a 6-foot-tall tiefling and a bloody assassin. Obi can stab him at any moment. But anyway, Theo reassured her friend by clarifying that her character wasn't going to harm the orc. In fact, Obi likes it too. A few days ago, Gareth told his friends about Dungeons and Dragons. It's a new world with endless possibilities. Adventure, colorful battles, and intricate political plots. However, this guy didn't take into account what such discretion could lead to. The game session had just started, and Izzy had already started flirting with the elf, while Theo suddenly wanted to rape the orc. Gareth was already regretting having invited these dumbasses to play such a masterpiece. However, he had nowhere to go, so he had only one way out. Step 1. Close the book. Step 2. Look at them with parental frustration. Gareth had read about this technique in a manual on vegetarian diplomacy and communicating with vegetables. Unfortunately, his friends are even stupider than vegetables, so obviously this method didn't work. Suddenly, you hear a scream coming from outside, the announcer said indifferently, opening the script book again. Everyone in the tavern rushes to the door to find out what's going on. Solar opens the door, and the heroes see before them something they certainly didn't expect to encounter today. A banshee has flown into town, and it seems she's here to deal with the heroes who finished off her subordinates. Suddenly, someone's footsteps were heard from behind the backs of the people gathered at the door. Placing a hand on Solare's shoulder, the white-haired elf coolly mouthed that he would handle it himself. Having said that, Obi Lightning quickly tore towards his opponent, literally vaporizing right in front of the paladin's eyes. Pulling out a short dagger, the elf immediately leapt at the banshee, preparing to chop her to pieces. Obi flies through her and does no damage. Apparently, he'd forgotten that the banshee is a freaking ghost. That's when Theo and his character realized how badly they screwed up. Looking at her friend perplexed, Izzy said that she had previously thought that Obi, the blood assassin, had a rather high level of intelligence. Shamefully covering her face with her hand, Theo confirmed this. Obi does indeed have a high intelligence score, but his player does not. Looking at the scenario book, the announcer announced the banshee's move. As it flew closer to its victims, the monster wailed exhaustedly. From that hideous sound, all the heroes who had not had time to cover their ears were literally dumbfounded. Unable to stay on her feet, no one fell unconsciously to her knees. The only one who didn't get hit by the banshee's attack was Solaire. Thanks to the fact that the boy managed to plug his ears with his fingers, he managed to avoid the fate that had befallen his new friends. And the fate of these heroes turned out to be much worse than one could imagine. Everyone who couldn't block the sound had their health score plummet to 0. But what was even more surprising was that Solar, even when left alone against such a powerful enemy, remained calm. Oh no, I was wrong. To be honest, this guy was scared shitless. This monster's face alone was terrifying. He managed to disable the 4 heroes with just one attack. Anyway, it's time to start the first boss battle, and Solar has no idea what to do next. How can he possibly handle a monster like this on his own? While he was thinking about it, the announcer reminded the guy that he could try to revive someone. Preparing a healing spell, Solar looked thoughtfully at the comrades lying beneath his feet and wondered which of them would be most useful. Squatting down next to the knocked-out orc, the paladin decided to lift him first. Using healing magic on Imsh, Solar cured his partner, giving him a chance to fight again. Abruptly jumping to his feet, the orc shouted in rage that he would finish this monster off with one blow. Anyway, nothing had changed since last time. The banshee was still intangible, so Imsh's fist expectedly went through her. The attack failed again, and the orc dealt 0 damage to the enemy with his move. Noticing Amesh's reaction to this outcome, the god asked him not to make a surprised face. Gareth had said it was a ghost, so it couldn't be killed by physical attacks. Taking a deep breath, the announcer explained to the players that maybe they could deal damage with magic weapons in such a case. If only someone had a magical weapon that emitted divine light, Gareth hinted, glancing at the paladin. An awkward lull followed these words of his. Only after a while did it finally dawn on Solar what the god meant. Continuing to sit on his knees, the boy clapped his hands together. Concentrating, he made a gesture of prayer with his hands. At the same moment, divine light began to seep out from his palms. Just as Solar began to extend his arms, a bright beam appeared in space. In just a couple of seconds, the paladin had already created a magical sword capable of smashing enemies with divine power. Stabbing the blade of his new weapon into the ground, the paladin leaned on it and asked the god to wait a moment. Before doing so, Solar, with a healer's smile, decided to check with Gareth to see if this banshee was a lost, tormented soul. The boy would really like to talk to her first, instead of mindlessly engaging in mortal combat. You sense an aura of pure evil emanating from her, the anchorman muttered, unwilling to deviate from the script he had written. Such words changed Solar's mood almost immediately. His harmless healer's smile changed to a killer's mad grin. Evil, you say? The paladin interjected, staring grimly at the ghost. Then I must clap its cheeks. After this phrase came out of the angry paladin's mouth, several smites were heard. Saying that her ears were ringing, Alice pulled herself up and asked what was wrong. Surprisingly, the girls were the first to wake up. They didn't seem to be as badly hurt by the banshee's attack. Holding her head, the golden-haired thief looked around and wondered where the hot elf was. Is he okay? After confirming that her character was fine, Theo remarked that, even lying unconscious on the ground, he was still cute. Then, walking over to Obi, Alice touched his shoulder and tried to wake him up. Waking up, the elf sat down next to the orc and asked what the hell had happened. After explaining that they'd all passed out, Alice said that it seemed that paladin had fought the ghost alone. Looking at Solar, the heroes saw his breathless body lying on the ground and not moving. But then the guy put his finger up, showing his friends that he was perfectly fine. After 2 battles in one day, the heroes are definitely tired. Knowing this, the tavern owner allowed them to stay in the rooms upstairs if they wanted to, of course. However, Alice declined the offer, saying that sleep is for wimps. Now this girl wants to have a good celebration of today's victories, and so she asked the innkeeper to bring her more alcohol. And while the thief drank from a small mug, Imsh, standing on the table, gulped down liters of ale from a huge keg. He must be very thirsty. In the midst of the night's festivities, a certain man approached the adventurers and asked for a spare moment to ask a few questions. The man turned out to be a member of the town guard, and he was sent to investigate these strange occurrences. Looking at the heroes seriously, the guard asked if they knew what had happened. "We kicked their ass! That's what happened!" Imsh shrieked happily, suddenly breaking into the conversation. Looking at the huge orc squawking at the tiefling's horns, the guard took a moment to remark that it appeared to be the case, but he'd come here to find out if the heroes knew where the monsters came from. Obi answered that they had no idea, but one thing was clear. These creatures had come here uninvited. Upon listening to the elf, the uniformed man also informed them that the city guards were going to form a search party to find out more about what had happened. If the heroes were interested, they could join this group, not for thanks, of course. Obi immediately agreed, explaining that he was always in favor of anything that could bring gold. Solar also did not refuse, saying that he would be glad to help in a right cause. The orc and tiefling weren't quite as verbose, but they too agreed rather quickly. Bidding farewell to the heroes, the guard said he could use their help. With those who wanted to get involved, he made an appointment to meet tomorrow morning in front of the inn. Meanwhile, the golden-haired thief had already finished another bottle of hops. So, what do we have? Alice is already drunk off her ass and can barely stand on her feet. Alice, where are you going? Yes, you read that right. She went to flirt with the elf. A dice rolled across the playing table with a cracking sound. With a sly look at Theo, Izzy told the host that she was rolling the dice on flirting. What's a pretty elf like you? Alice began her speech, about to lean her elbow on the table. Before the girl could finish her sentence, her elbow suddenly slipped off the edge. Unable to stay on her feet, the golden-haired thief bangs her cheek against the corner of the table. Seeing this hilarious scene, Obi struggled to contain his laughter. But let's not forget who Alice really is. She is an experienced thief, and so she had enough skill and reflexes to be able to lean on her hand in time to avoid falling. No, she's drunk. Glancing at the floor, Alice patted it and whispered how cute it is. Doing in a place like this? With a hiccup, the thief finally concluded. Such an unusual flirtation was clearly to Obi's liking. Taking his gaze away, the elf explained that he worked here. Taking the tipsy Alice under her arms, Imsh looked at Obi in surprise. Works, you say? The orc pronounced, lifting the golden-haired girl off the floor. Setting the thief down on a bar stool, Imsh asked the elf what his job was. And that was the question Obi had been waiting for. Holding out his card to the orc, the elf introduced himself as Obyrus Nalo, a freelance assassin. Puzzled, Solar came up behind him and asked the elf to clarify what he meant by freelancing. Is he killing freaks for money? Obi certainly didn't expect to hear such a strange description of his job. It seems that this dude really doesn't know the definition of the word freelance. Stepping closer to the elf, Imsh asked menacingly if he was killing people. Then, with a wink to the uncomprehending thug, Obi explained that he was just getting rid of trouble. Hearing that answer, the orc looked thoughtfully at the business card. I see. I want to roll the dice on intimidation, Tim said after a short pause, taking the dice in his hand. And when Theo asked him why he wanted to do that, the guy with the glasses said it was so that this elf wouldn't think of touching Imsh and his friends. However, the girl explained that Obi is paid to kill. It's not like he's killing random people. After listening carefully to his friend, Tim regarded her sympathetically and threw the die on the table anyway. At the same time, his character walked up to the elf and looked down at him. A tense silence hung in the air, and the menacing gaze of the huge orc immediately instilled terror in Obi. Commenting on the happenings in the game, the presenter said that Imsh scared the bloody assassin a bit with his menacing look. But, interrupting Gareth, Theo added that the orc had scared Obi in a good way. And so it was. Though the elf trembled with fear, he enjoyed it. Obi loves danger. It excites him. And while the orc stared menacingly at the elf, a woman's hand came out from under the table. Standing between the two, a drunken Alice mouthed her admiration for the assassins. I mean, she is very impressed that this guy has ass in the same word twice. You, assassin, have the most beautiful arse I've ever seen, the golden-haired girl remarked with a vulgar smile. With a hiccup, Alice told the kid that she would really like to see his dagger up close. However, Obi refused with the words that he didn't think it was a good idea. Interrupting the great hero's conversation, the innkeeper reminded them that the party was long over. Then the man told me that there were rooms upstairs. Tonight's overnight stay will be free of charge, especially for these guys. The tavern owner left to get the keys, and Obi, feeling the amorous and annoyed looks of Alice and Imsha on him, pushed them away from him. Upon returning, the innkeeper apologized to the heroes, explaining that there were only 4 rooms, and so the adventurers would have to share them somehow. Hearing what the tavern owner had just said, the elf looked at him perplexed and asked what he meant by share. After waving the key, the innkeeper apologized to the heroes once more, but then added that the rooms were quite large, and so the guests would be quite comfortable. As soon as the man spoke this sentence, the key from his hand suddenly disappeared. Twirling the key on his finger, Obi wished his new companions good night, and when Alice asked who he would be sharing a room with, the elf replied that tonight he would sleep with his inner demons. Alice wanted someone to play with, but her elf was gone. She sits there, sad, holding her bottle, holding it like a teddy bear. Only these 4 heroes were left in the bar. It has been a long day and they're all ready to go to bed, all except the stubborn half-orc. Imsh is left to guard the door in case of another undead attack. Imsh protect the door. Imsh guard the sleep of his friends. Staring at the script book, Gareth announced that the other characters had gone to bed as it was getting late. Interrupting the presenter, Izzy asked if Alice could continue to suffer bullshit. She could stay awake for a long time. Averting his gaze, the guy with glasses explained to the girl that she must have misunderstood him. He was talking about real life. It was getting late, and Gareth had to get up early tomorrow. After saying that, he slammed the script book shut. The first Dungeons & Dragons gaming session has come to an end. The next morning came. Opening her eyes, the golden-haired thief saw her room illuminated by the sunlight streaming through the window. But truth be told, the whole picture in her eyes was cloudy. Alice woke up and immediately ducked her face into her pillow. Last night's drinking gave her a terrible headache. Once dressed, the golden-haired thief left the room and headed for the bar. Walking down the stairs, the girl suddenly bumped into a cheerful orc who immediately wished her a good morning. Looking at Imsh perplexed, Alice greeted him as well. After that, the girl shifted her gaze and looked around the bar. The others had long since woken up too, and were eating breakfast at the same table. The elf that Alice had tried to flirt with last night was also sitting there. Turning to the golden-haired girl, Imsh smiled and offered to take her shopping with him. Alice clearly hadn't expected such a suggestion from the bulky man. Denying the orc, the thief explained that she could barely find the strength to get out of bed. What made him think her hungover ass could walk at all? Soon, Imsh arrived at the blacksmith shop, holding his new friend on his shoulder. And even then, Alice could not understand how she had come here so early, and why Imsh had decided to take her in the first place. Starting to pound the orc's back with her fists, an angry Alice asked to at least let her have breakfast first. While the golden-haired girl was shaking off her jacket, a blacksmith approached Imshu and asked what kind of weapon he needed. In response, the orc said that he would like to buy an axe. Noting that the big man would definitely like that kind of weapon, the vendor asked what kind of axe he wanted. Big, Imsh replied confidently, looking over the assortment. Walking around the room, the still hungover Alice sighed heavily. At the same moment, the girl noticed something interesting. On the table beside her was some kind of box. Such a beautiful piece could not help but attract the attention of an experienced thief. Moving closer to the box, Alice turned around to see what her partner and the blacksmith were doing there. By that time, Imesh had already found a good axe that fit into his hands. Realizing that the orc was still distracting the shopkeeper's attention, the thief gathered herself to act. Turning toward the box, the girl held out her hand toward it. But suddenly, from behind Alice's back, came the voice of the blacksmith, deciding to ask Miss if there was anything he could do to help her. Holding her wrist with her hand, the golden-haired girl squinted at the man. After a brief silence, Alice replied that she didn't need any help, then thanked the blacksmith for his attention. Running up to the orc, she inquired if he had chosen his weapon. Showing his friend the huge axe, the joyful orc said he liked this thing. Yeah, well, it looks cool. Take that one. Alice agreed indifferently. Also noting that his visitor had good taste, the blacksmith warned that this battle axe cost 10 gold pieces. I have no money, Imsh suddenly muttered, staring hopelessly at the salesman. Alice looked at the orc questioningly, not understanding why the hell he had gone to the store without a penny in his pocket. As he left the blacksmith shop with his new axe, a happy Imsh thanked his partner for paying for it. Looking sadly into her wallet, Alice told the orc that she was not to be thanked. After all, she scratched his back now, and then Imsh himself would scratch her back. Then, perplexed, the orc reminded his friend that in fact, she had bought an axe, not scratched her back. In response, Alice explained to the big oaf that it was a metaphor. That means that Imsh now owes this girl. Perhaps she will cover herself with him as a meat shield in battle. Whatever the case, Alice advised her mate to just use that axe for its intended purpose. Smacking his friend's fist, the orc promised to cover her back at all costs. In any case, Alice was definitely not at a disadvantage. She had also taken something away from their little trip. Swinging open the door of the inn, the golden-haired thief reported to everyone that she and the orc had returned. Noticing his friends, Solar greeted them and asked where they were. The guard would be here any minute. After showing his partner his new weapon, Imsh told him that he had bought an axe. But Alice reminded him that it was she who had bought it for him. Laughing, the enthusiastic orc confirmed the fact that the axe was indeed bought by Alice. After congratulating his comrade on his acquisition, Solar agreed that where they were going today, these weapons could come in handy for Imshu. While they were discussing this amongst themselves, Obi, who was sitting at the table, felt someone's gaze on him and turned his head. Realizing that she had been spotted, Alice immediately tried to avoid the encounter with her eyes. Memories of last night began to return to the girl's mind. Alice tried her best to convince herself that she wasn't ashamed. And anyway, they wouldn't see each other that often. At the same moment, a guard ran into the tavern and greeted the brave heroes. Looking around at everyone in the bar, the man wondered if they were the adventurers he was supposed to meet. Upon entering the room, the man introduced himself as the head of the city guard of this city. Without letting him finish, Solar greeted Chester. Approaching his old friend, the paladin said how glad he was to see him, and then inquired if he would be joining their squad on the mission. Confirming this, Chester explained that he would be joining the expedition in place of the guard who had spoken to the heroes last night because such a mission might be too dangerous for a newcomer. Solar is the high priest at the local temple, and so he knows the head of the town guard. They hit it off, law-abiding good characters. Noticing Chester, a white-haired elf sitting at a table nearby called out to him with a chuckle. That's right. Solar is law-abiding and kind, which hasn't stopped him from getting along with the guards of the city. Obi, on the other hand, is a real troublemaker. As they looked into each other's eyes, the tension in the air began to multiply. Obi clenched his fist as he stepped close to the guard. Chester, in turn, braced himself. With a wave of their hands, the two gave a friendly greeting. Obi and Chester are actually best friends. Our villain works as a spy. He leaks information about suspicious mobs and murky operations. In return, the city guards turn a blind eye to Obi's morally questionable actions. If you can't beat someone, join them, it's simple. Despite their differing moral views on life, the two get along very well. Walking up to the orc, Chester shook his hand, happy to see a new face in this town. After looking the newcomer over from head to toe, the head of the city guard remarked that he looked very green. Hearing such a strange compliment, Amesh gave the guard a serious look. In the next second, the huge orc blossomed into a grateful smile. Telling Chester that it was a pleasure to meet him, the orc introduced himself by the name Imsh. The next person Chester had to find common ground with was the beautiful tiefling. When the guard stood across from her, no one bowed respectfully to him. Chester decided to keep up with her and bowed back. It was a rather strange acquaintance. Even standing close to each other, they did not say a word together. Eventually, Chester did dilute the strange atmosphere with a nice, welcoming gesture. "What a good boy," thought the heroes, looking contentedly at the head of the city guard. Meanwhile, Chester had already approached Alice and reached out to her and told her that he would be happy to work with each of the characters. Ignoring his hand, the girl introduced herself to him, then indifferently asked what the mission was about. Handing her a sack with gold jingling inside, the guard told her that half of the reward would be given to the heroes now, and another half at the end. Grabbing the bag of gold, Alice shook Chester's hand and said she was happy to work with him too. Having finished familiarizing himself with everyone, the head of the city guard asked the heroes if they were ready to move out. The road will be long, as the adventurers will have to go through the forest and ruins. Setting off with his companions, Solar asked if they thought the winter was beautiful. The orc and the elf agreed immediately. Alice objected, however, noting that it was too damn cold. "So these two are not wearing jackets. How do they do it?" Imsh responded by saying that jackets are uncomfortable. Obi in turn clarified that he is a Gucci. Walking next to no one, Imsh pulled out some special snacks for the orcs and began eating them with gusto. At one point, the orc decided to give the beautiful tiefling a treat, but she shook her head and refused. At the same time, Solar and Chester were walking ahead of the squad and talking about something. Holding the bow in her hand, Alice asked the elf what that Gucci even meant. As it turned out, it was some elven word that the thief was apparently not meant to understand. Weaving behind the entire troop, Alice kept her eyes on Obi's back. Even though she was drunk last night, that sentence of hers was true. That guy really does have a great arse. But remembering that she had actually said it to his face yesterday, Alice became embarrassed and averted her gaze. Suddenly, the golden-haired girl crashed into the back of Obi, who for some reason stood still. Glancing irritatedly at the elf, Alice asked what the hell he was doing. Why did he stop so abruptly? Turning back to his partner, Obi put a finger to his mouth, giving the girl a hint to keep her voice down. Not sure how she should react to the gesture, the thief fell into a stupor for a while. But then she turned all red and saliva flowed from her mouth. Pointing his finger somewhere, Obi drew his friend's attention to what had caused him to stop. Reacting, the girl instantly aimed her bow at where the elf had pointed. At the same moment, another rustle was heard from behind the bushes. Drawing the bowstring, Alice was ready to shoot at the enemy waiting in ambush. Fortunately, she wouldn't have to fight now. Turns out there was no enemy in the bushes, but a regular deer. Realizing that everything was fine, Obi and Alice relaxed and got ready to move on. As suddenly, Imsh ran up to them asking them to shoot this deer. After being rebuffed, the orc explained to his friends that if they shot this deer, they would have a fine dinner tonight. However, Alyssa had picked up on the fact that Imsh didn't seem to have thought through the fact that they simply wouldn't be able to carry around the corpse of a huge animal. The orc in turn reassured the girl, reminding her that he was strong enough to carry a deer. With an embarrassed look at Imsh, the thief said that wasn't what she meant at all. And while they were talking amongst themselves, the deer had already escaped. Seeing this, Alice exhaled with relief. Poking the elf in the shoulder, the girl asked him not to joke around like that again. She thought there were undead or something hiding in the bushes. Apologizing to his partner, Obi explained that he just thought this deer looked beautiful. "You look beautiful," Alice barely audibly whispered, casting a loving glance at the elf. And when Obi asked his friend what she had said, the girl brushed it off, saying he had just misheard. Except that Obi actually heard everything perfectly well. And so for the next few minutes, he just walked on and grinned at the embarrassed thief. Meanwhile, walking ahead of them, the orc continued his meal, eating his snacks. Just as suddenly, Amesh heard a quiet rustling. Turning around, he again hears a strange sound somewhere in the bushes. The first thing that came to the orc's mind was that there was a deer hiding there again. Hoping at least this time not to miss his prey, Imsh walks over to the bushes and pushes them apart with his hands. There he sees eerie eyes glowing with a bright red light. It seems to be something more horrible than an ordinary deer. What Imesh saw struck him hard. This time, there was a cute little squirrel sitting in the bushes. Of course, a good-hearted fellow like Imsh was delighted at this unexpected meeting. Squatting down in front of the little animal, the orc asked if he could pet it. Stopping Tim, the announcer reminded him that his character was a fat-ass big half-orc. As he's going to pet a tiny-ass squirrel, Tim has to make a straight save roll. To everyone's delight, the number 20 came up on the die. However, the first to realize the true state of affairs was Jade. The girl reminded her friends that Tim was rolling a strength check, which can only mean that the higher the number on the die, the more damage its gentle touch will do. Unfortunately, in trying to pet the little squirrel, the orc crushed it. Realizing what he had done, Imsh looked guiltily at Alice. To support their distraught friend, the thief and elf approached him. Telling Imshu not to get upset, Obi advised him to look for the upside in everything. If you thought about it that way, he had gotten the food. He'd wanted to shoot that deer, and this was just as good. Asking the elf not to say such things, Alice asked if he couldn't see that Imsh was sad. He was so upset with this squirrel that he immediately went to dig her a little grave. Well, rest in peace, innocent little beast. All the while Imsh was burying the squirrel, Alice and Obi were watching with perplexed faces. Realizing the absurdity of the situation, they still couldn't contain their laughter. Patting the crying orc on the back, Solar whispered to these godless men to stop taunting. But this scene only made the thief and the elf laugh even more. The search team soon arrived at the destination. Chester immediately advised the great heroes to be careful. These ruins are a favorite spot for the undead. The important thing now is to keep guard. Looking around the area, Solar noticed that it was suspiciously quiet. "Oh no, it's so quiet," Alice said sarcastically, receiving encouragement from the elf standing next to her. Asking Solar to shut up, the girl realized that by saying such words, the dude was asking the universe to put some shit on their squad. The head of the city guard, in turn, suggested that his comrades slow down a bit. He thought that in such a situation, it was better not to hurry and remain unnoticed. Just as he finished saying this, the slowly receding clanking of armor was heard behind him. "Solar ran ahead, didn't he?" Chester clarified with a stone face to the remaining heroes. Calling out to the paladin, the guard advised him not to walk that way. "My boy, your armor is loud as hell," Obi agreed, trying to stop Solar. The scarred boy only grinned, reassuring his friends that he'd be fine. His nose could smell evil from miles around, and now he was fine. At the same moment, the paladin saw an army of skeletons in front of him. The god sitting on the clouds reminded Solar that it's actually a board game. That means that until he rolls a die, his nose won't smell anything. And now it's too late to roll anything. Unwilling to accept that he was, to put it mildly, shitting himself, Solar suggested that maybe these skeletons weren't evil at all. "They're evil," the announcer convinced him, causing one of the skeletons to throw a bone in the guy's face. Realizing that they were in trouble because of the stupidity of this half-witted moron, Alice and Obi, sighing heavily, prepared to fight. Observing what was happening, the god asked Solar when he would realize. "When will he finally understand?" There are consequences to not rolling the die on perception. Soon, when the battle was over, the wounded Alice and Obi sat down next to each other and stared at Solar with disdain. The orc and the tiefling were not far behind them and were clearly unhappy with the paladin's behavior as well. Meanwhile, a guy with a scar on his face and a huge black eye sat guiltily on his knees in front of them. Not daring to look his partners in the eye, Solar said he was sorry. "Are you sorry? Motherfucker, no way! What are you sorry about? That you ran ahead, got into a fight, and forced us to save your ass?" Alice clarified, keeping her gaze fixed on the paladin. Stunned at such words, Solar replied that that was the way it was. Sighing heavily, the golden-haired girl regretted teaming up with such an idiot. Asking Alice to stop, Chester remarked that it wasn't very nice of her. They were in the same squad after all, and so they should try to get along with each other during the mission. However, the thief clarified to the guard that she wasn't here to be nice. She's only here for the gold. And frankly, she doesn't know any of them, and certainly doesn't trust any of them. With that in mind, Alice wants to be excused from the "let's get along" lectures. The sooner they finish this mission, the better. Having said that, Alice motioned for the others to move out. Izzy was interrupted by Gareth, reminding her that her character had a very low health score. She was incredibly anxious to rest. Realizing that she was really quite tired, Alice reconsidered her decision to continue the mission immediately. Leaning against the wall, the girl motioned for her partners to move out after she got some sleep. After these words, the thief turned away from everyone and fell asleep. Obi looked at Solar for a while longer with a serious expression. Turning away, the elf decided to follow Alice's example and get some rest as well. Seeing the way his partners were now treating him, Solar became very worried. He is truly ashamed of himself for acting so cocky and putting his comrades in danger. Everyone is down, and that's why Solar can't just leave it like that. Rising to his feet, the guy exhaled and decided to try and give a motivational speech. While the paladin was gathering his thoughts, the thief and the elf had already fallen into a sound sleep. "Oh, how brightly the sun is shining!" heard someone's frantic voice, waking the two of them up. Drawing the attention of his comrades, Solar shrieked that the sun would guide them. Alice and Obi looked at the psycho in confusion, trying to figure out what the hell he was talking about. At the same time, Solar tried to convince his partners that Pelor, the sun god, was here with them. And therefore all the members of the squad were obliged to glorify him. "Hail Pelor!" yelled the paladin, waving his hands. After this sudden shout, Solar raised his hands up and, shining, praised the sun. Applying the smile of a true priest, the paladin asked his partners to take the path of righteousness and believe in the light, for only then would it reach them. The thief and the elf continued to stare at him in bewilderment after hearing the fiery speech of this scarred fellow. Then, after a short silence, Alice said that she believed. She believed that her fist would soon reach Solar's face if he didn't shut up and let her rest in peace. Ignoring another of Solar's schizophrenic fits, Chester tried to warm his hands. With a look at his comrades, the guard said that they would continue exploring the place when everyone was ready. Today, Chester wants to check out the abandoned Thieves Guild building. When she came to the building after a while, Alice noticed that the place was huge. Agreeing with her, the guard suggested to split up, but not to go too far alone. The best option would be to split into pairs. The beautiful tiefling was determined to be paired with a half-orc. Climbing the creaking stairs with the thief, Obi warned the others that they would check the top floor. Already being on the second floor, the white-haired elf was glad they were finally away from the sunny boy. Supporting him, Alice agreed that the guy was just insufferable. He doesn't shut up about his god. Why are all paladins so pissy? Heading toward the window, Obi suggested that perhaps it was part of their duties. Looking outside, the elf drew Alice's attention to what a beautiful view there was from above. The snow-capped mountains are beautifully visible from here, the tall trees of the vast forest, and the way Solar is being chased by skeletons again. Not believing that the sunny boy was in trouble again, Obi asked Alice if they should help him. Of course, the golden-haired girl offered to help the poor guy, but only in a moment, because the view from here is really beautiful, and it would be a real sin not to enjoy it. Meanwhile, the skeletons had already knocked poor Solar to the ground. The paladin tried to brush off his opponents and asked them to stop, shouting that he had few health points left. Suddenly, one of the skeletons drew his sword over his head, preparing to deliver a decisive blow to the hero. At the same second, he heard the clink of a rapier blade. Obi landed on the chest of the nearly passed-out Solar, cutting through all the enemies with a couple of lunges. Trying not to catch his last breath, the dazed paladin asked the elf if it was necessary to pounce on him. Smirking, Obi explained that it was rather difficult to control the landing when jumping from the second floor. Then, leaning into Solar's face, the elf asked for an answer as to why he was so attracted to all the bad guys. Maybe it was his aura? While he was saying this, someone's shadow appeared above them. Holding a sharp sword in his hand, the tall, black-cloaked skeleton was already ready to chop these two into pieces. As suddenly, out of nowhere, an arrow flies into the monster's head, killing it instantly. Noticing that her arrow had hit its target, the golden-haired thief exhaled in relief. Calling out to the white-haired elf, Alice suggested that he stop with the gay jokes and get back to work. The girl wanted to get it all sorted out and go home soon. It was already nightfall, and the squad of heroes kept looking for something. And so, Chester finally found his way into the underground tunnels. Turning to the adventurers, the guard asked if they wanted to check out the neighborhood one more time before descending. A puzzled glance at Chester, Alice asked why they would want to do that. There were no more undead here, so there was no point in lingering. Whistling casually, the guard explained that there might well be a few interesting things lying around. Anticipating the profit, Alice agreed with a sly smile that there could indeed be quite valuable things lying here purely by chance. It wouldn't hurt to look around. Shrieking that Chester was right, Solar said he had found something. After saying that, he took out his helmet and put it on his head. Turning back to the paladin, Alyssa noticed that he looked like shit in that thing. But the opinion of others didn't bother Solar at all, for with or without his helmet, he could shine. At the same time, Obi found some kind of strange urn. As Chester later told him, it turned out to be the urn containing the great hero's ashes. After looking at the thing from all angles, the elf asked the guard how he knew that. Then, pointing a finger, Chester drew his partner's attention to the engraving. The urn was indeed labeled Ashes of a Great Hero. Surprised that someone was keeping the pointless thing, Obi decided to throw it away, saying he didn't need it. But for some reason, after these words, the elf still stood staring at this useless urn for some time. Taking the thing under his armpit, Obi walked over to the sunny boy with the bucket on his head and motioned for the others to move out. Staring bewildered at the two weirdos, Alice and Chester couldn't believe that they would actually take this junk with them. Walking through the dungeon, the crackling of wall torches could be heard. Looking around, Alice observed that some people never learn from their mistakes. Looking at the map, Chester asked the girl what she meant. "The paladin escaped again," Alice explained, putting the guard in a stupor. Noticing his startled face, the thief asked the man not to look surprised, as it was already commonplace. "Throw it on the map!" Chester shouted in panic that it wasn't that simple. "This dude can get separated from the group, but not in a place like this." Sighing, Alice asked the guard to give the fool a savory kick when she found him. This moron still won't learn his lesson until someone forcibly beat common sense into him. Meanwhile, Solar was walking through the dungeon in proud solitude and couldn't believe his eyes. Looking around, the paladin marveled that he was finally in a real dungeon. It reeked of evil, and Solar couldn't wait to slay it. At the same moment, the guy in the helmet heard someone screaming behind him. Running up to Solar, Chester asked him in Pelor's name to stop running away all the time already. With a perplexed look at the guard, the paladin asked not to worry about him, saying he would be fine. However, at the time, Solar had no idea what would happen next. Pushing the paladin, Chester motioned for him to stop and wait for the others. It was too dangerous here to walk alone like this. Grinning, an annoyed Solar told the guard to stop worrying about him and yelled that he was worrying too much. But with a concerned look at the paladin, Chester tried to convince him that on the contrary, it was he who was worrying too little. As soon as the head of the city guard said this, there was a loud sound of electric lightning. Alice asked Chester to teach this paladin a lesson, but that lesson ended up being much harsher than one might expect. Solar's stubbornness turned to tragedy.
Pet the cat.